Today, we're diving into one of the most important moments in all of Korean history, the 1919 March 1st movement. But we're not going to just look at the big picture. We're going to start with the roar of an entire nation and zoom all the way in to the story of a single village, a single street.
And that's really the big question we're asking today. We know that millions of people took part in this incredible cry for freedom. But what did a movement that massive actually look, feel, and, sound like for the people on the ground in one small town? Well, let's find out.
All right, so let's set the scene. On March 1st, 1919, this huge, non-violent movement just erupted all across the Korean peninsula. You had people from every walk of life pouring into the streets, waving flags and chanting one single, powerful phrase, Daehan Dongnip Manse. It means long live Korean independence, and it was this unified, totally peaceful rejection of Japanese colonial rule.
But of course, an entire nation doesn't just rise up overnight. So what were the sparks that actually lit this massive fire?
Well, it really boils down to three key things. First, you've got nearly a decade of resentment just simmering under the surface against Japanese colonial rules since they annexed Korea in 1910. Then, this idea starts spreading like wildfire across the globe after World War I. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson's call for national self-determination, and for Koreans that was a huge spark of hope. And finally, the trigger. The sudden and really suspicious death of King Gojong. Rumors flew that he'd been poisoned, and that just lit a match under public anger.
And here's a cool little detail. You might also hear this event called the Jimmy Independence Movement. That's because 1919 was the Jimmy year in the traditional 60-year Korean calendar. It's a small thing, but it just goes to show you how deeply this event is woven into the country's cultural fabric.
I mean, the scale of this was just staggering. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. We're not talking about one protest in Seoul. This thing exploded in over 2,000 different places across the entire country. Everyone, from students and religious leaders to merchants and farmers, everybody joined in. It was truly a movement of the people.
But, numbers like that can start to feel a little abstract, right? So now we're going to do what we promised at the start. We're going to zoom in, way in, from those thousands of locations to just one. This is the story of a small town called Kwangdeok-myeon.
So let's listen to that one town's voice.
So, it's late March 1919, and the spirit of the movement finally reaches this town. Thousands of people gathered together near a local landmark, Mount Pungdeok, and their destination was both strategic and really symbolic. A Japanese police outpost built right next to the town's Confucian school, the traditional heart of the community.
Can you just imagine the sound? As they surrounded that outpost, the crowd let out that same cry for independence. Someone who was there described it perfectly. The cheers were loud enough to shake the sky. Wow. I mean, that wasn't just noise. That was the sound of a community pouring out all its hope, all its frustration, and all its desire for freedom in one single, powerful voice.
But that passionate, peaceful cry was met with panic. The Japanese police, totally overwhelmed by the size of the crowd, opened fire. And in an instant, the sound of cheers was replaced by the crack of rifles.
And in that moment, a national movement became intensely personal, because behind all the statistics and the big numbers are the stories of individuals, the actual faces of this movement.
On March 31st alone, it's estimated that 1,300 people from this one small community gathered to demand their freedom. Just think about that, 1,300 people. That is a staggering number for a single local protest.
And right there in that crowd of 1,300, we can find a much smaller group, just 15 students, all of them following their teacher, a man by the name of Chung-gu Lee.
So let's focus on two of these people. First, you had the teacher, Chung-gu Lee. He actually used to be a government official, but he opened a village school after the annexation. He led his students to the protest where he was shot by the police. His students carried him into the mountains, but he tragically died from his wounds. And then there was Noon-jik Lee, a young patriot in that same crowd. He was shot in the shoulder but survived. He was forced to flee his hometown, and he spent the rest of his life continuing the fight for independence all across the country. Two men, one cause, two very different fates.
And the sacrifice of teacher Chung-gu Lee was never forgotten. For years after his death, his former students would make a pilgrimage to his grave, every single year just to clear the weeds and pay their respects. It was their way of making sure the story of the teacher who died for his country would never ever fade away.
All right, it's time to zoom back out. Because the sacrifices in small towns like Kwangdeok-myeon, they weren't just isolated tragedies. They were all threads in a much larger tapestry, one that was weaving together the future of an entire nation.
And the impact was immediate and profound. This nationwide uprising in March was a powerful catalyst. I mean, think about it. Just 1 month later, in April of 1919, Korean leaders established the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea over in Shanghai. A widespread protest had officially transformed into an organized political struggle for sovereignty.
So back in Kwangdeok-myeon, yes, the shouts for independence were silenced by gunfire. People were hurt, lives were lost, but their spirit and the spirit of the entire nation was not broken. In fact, it had just been awakened.
And this brings us right back to where we started. History is so often told through these grand narratives and big numbers. But as the story of Kwangdeok-myeon shows us, sometimes the true heart of history beats strongest on a single street. It really makes you wonder, whose stories are we missing when we only look at the big picture?